She hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not one word. Not even her mother's name. But that Tuesday morning, something shifted. The city was still half asleep. Gray light bleeding through the buildings, the low groan of a garbage truck rolling down the street. Jack moved the way men do when no one is watching, quiet, deliberate, like the work itself was worth doing right. Lily did not reach for her mother. Not for the nanny, not for any of the polished, expensive hands that had spent 2 years trying to pull her back into the world. She reached for him. Claire Donovan, billionaire, untouchable, a woman who had never once been handed a problem she couldn't solve, stood on that sidewalk and felt for the first time completely powerless. What she didn't know yet was that she was about to lose something far greater than control. Jack Harlan had been waking up at 4:30 in the morning for nearly 20 years, and he had stopped resenting it sometime around year 3. The alarm went off. He made coffee in the dark, and by the time the sun was still deciding whether to show up, he was already 2 streets deep into his route. There was a rhythm to it, the hiss of the hydraulic lift, the scrape of bins on asphalt, the way certain blocks smelled different depending on the season. He knew this city the way most people never would from the inside of its mornings, before it had the chance to compose itself. He wasn't a man who talked much about his life. If you asked him, he'd tell you he drove a truck and raised a daughter, and that was about the size of it. Emily was 6, gap-toothed and fearless, and every morning, without fail, she stood at the top of their porch steps in whatever she'd grabbed off the floor, mismatched socks, a dinosaur shirt, her hair still wild from sleep, and waved at him like he was setting off on something important. He always waved back. He always meant it. It was enough. Most days, it was more than enough. Claire Donovan did not do mornings the way other people did mornings. By 6 a.m., her phone had already logged 47 notifications. By 7, she had reviewed 2 contracts, sent 9 emails, and approved a settlement that her legal team had spent 3 weeks preparing. She ran a firm that operated across 4 continents, and the machine of it never fully stopped. It just got quieter at night, waiting for her to come back. She was the kind of woman other people described as formidable, usually with a mixture of admiration and wariness. She had built something from nothing on her own terms, and she wore that fact the way she wore everything else without apology. Control was not a personality trait for Claire. It was a language, the only one she had ever fully trusted. Lily was 4 years old and had not spoken a word in 2 years. She had been a different child before, chatty, curious, always pulling at Claire's sleeve to point at something only she found remarkable. Then, something shifted quietly and without warning, and the words stopped coming. The specialists Claire hired, and she hired the best, flew them in from Boston and London, and Zurich used careful clinical language to describe what had happened. Selective mutism, they said. Trauma response. Give it time. She gave it time. She gave it money. She gave it every resource her considerable world could produce. Nothing worked. What none of the specialists said, what Claire would not have been able to hear, even if they had, was that Lily didn't need another intervention. She needed her mother to sit still long enough to be found. The morning it happened was a Tuesday in early June, warm already by 8 o'clock, the kind of day that arrives with the quiet confidence of summer settling in for good. Claire was walking Lily to the car, the black sedan idling at the curb, the driver already holding the door when Lily stopped. Not slowed. Stopped completely, both feet planted on the sidewalk, as though something in the concrete had reached up and held her. Claire turned. "Lily, come on. We're going to be—" But Lily wasn't looking at her. Across the street, a man in a faded orange vest was crouched beside a garbage truck, tying off a bag with the kind of focused calm that makes a person look for a moment like they are doing something sacred. He worked the way people do when they've long since stopped performing for an audience. Hands practiced, movements economical. His whole body settled into the task as if there were nowhere else he was supposed to be. Lily watched him, the way children watch things that adults have learned to walk past. The man Jack must have felt it, that specific gravity of being observed. He straightened and looked across the street, and for a moment he and the little girl simply looked at each other. He didn't wave. He didn't make the exaggerated performative face that most adults make when they notice a small child staring at them. He just looked back, calm and steady, the same way he did everything else. Then he reached into the front pocket of his vest and pulled out a small wildflower, a daisy ragged at the edges, the kind that pushes up through sidewalk cracks and refuses to be unremarkable. He must have picked it up earlier in the morning, the way people pocket small things without quite knowing why. He held it out in Lily's direction. Not an offering exactly. More like an acknowledgement. Here. This is for you if you want it. Lily stepped off the curb. Claire's hand shot out instinctively. Lily. But Lily was already crossing, deliberate and unafraid, in the way that 4-year-olds move when they are certain about something. She stopped in front of Jack and looked up at him. He crouched down to her level, held out the flower, and waited. She took it. And then so quietly that Claire almost missed it from across the street. Lily smiled, not the polite, reflexive expression that therapists sometimes coaxed out of her. Something real, something that started in her eyes. Claire stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand and did not move. She could call Marcus, her head of security. She could be in the car in 30 seconds. She could have this entire interaction erased from her daughter's morning before it had the chance to mean anything. She had done harder things than this before breakfast. Instead, she stayed where she was. Not because she trusted the man across the street. She didn't know him. She didn't trust anyone she hadn't vetted, contracted, or proven. She stayed because of the smile, because in 2 years of specialists and interventions, and every resource her world could offer, she had not seen her daughter's face look like that, like something had been returned to it. And Claire Donovan, who always knew exactly what to do next, had absolutely no idea what to do with that. The following Tuesday, Lily stopped at the same spot on the sidewalk. Claire had told herself it wouldn't happen again, that it had been a moment, one of those small, inexplicable things that children do, and then forget entirely. She had even taken a different route to the car, steering Lily toward the rear entrance of the building where the sedan usually waited. But Lily had planted her feet in the lobby and looked up at her mother with an expression that was not a tantrum and not a plea. It was something quieter and more absolute than either of those things. They took the front entrance. Jack was there. Same block, same orange vest, same patient rhythm. This time he saw Lily coming and simply nodded. No performance, no theatrics, the way you might acknowledge someone you'd been expecting. Lily walked up to him and held out a piece of folded paper. She had drawn a figure in orange crayon, broad-shouldered, standing next to something large and rectangular that was probably meant to be the truck. It was the kind of drawing that required explanation to fully appreciate, but Jack looked at it for a long moment with the seriousness it deserved. "That's a good truck," he said. Lily watched his face. Then she turned and walked back to her mother. Claire looked down at her daughter, then across at the man still holding the crayon drawing carefully by its edges so as not to smudge it. She said nothing. She didn't have language yet for what she was watching. She wasn't sure she wanted to. It became a Tuesday thing. Lily began preparing her offerings during the week, quietly, in the private hours of her room, while the apartment hummed around her. A smooth gray river stone she'd found at the edge of the park, carried home in her jacket pocket. A red maple leaf pressed flat between 2 books until it held its shape. A paper crane. She'd folded herself imperfectly, one wing slightly higher than the other, which somehow made it look more like it was actually trying to fly. Each week she brought one thing. Each week, Jack received it the same way, with full attention, without condescension, as though the transaction were entirely normal and also entirely serious. He stored the stone in the cup holder of his truck. He taped the leaf to the inside of his visor. The crane went on the dashboard, where it caught the morning light. He never pushed her to speak. He never leaned in too close or asked questions that required answers. He seemed to understand, without being told that the space between them was exactly the right size, and that his job was simply not to collapse it. Lily still didn't speak, but she came back. Every week she came back. Claire watched from a distance that she kept telling herself was appropriate. She stood near the car with her phone in her hand, and most mornings, she did not look at the screen. She watched her daughter move through those few minutes with an ease that she had not seen anywhere else. Not at home, not in the therapist's offices with their soft lighting and their careful questions, not anywhere that Claire had arranged and paid for and controlled. She didn't know what to do with any of it. So she kept her distance, and she kept watching, and she told herself that was enough. It wasn't enough. On a morning in late July, Claire crossed the street. She hadn't planned it. The car was waiting. She had a call in 40 minutes with partners in London, and her coffee was going cold in the cup holder. But her feet moved before her mind could negotiate, and then she was standing a few feet from Jack, who looked up from the bin he'd been loading and waited. Claire was not a woman who struggled with words. In boardrooms and courtrooms and across negotiating tables at midnight, she had always known exactly what to say and exactly when to say it. But standing on that sidewalk in her tailored coat with her cold coffee and her 40-minute deadline, the sentence that came out of her was the most unguarded one she had spoken in years. "She hasn't said a word," Claire said. "Not in 2 years. I've had her with the best specialists in the country. Flew someone in from London. Flew another one in from Zurich." She stopped herself from listing more names, more cities, more figures. Nothing worked. Not one of them could reach her. She wasn't asking him anything. She wasn't sure why she was talking at all. Maybe it was easier somehow to say it to someone who had no stake in her image, no reason to handle her carefully. Jack set down the bag he'd been holding. He looked at Lily, who was crouched a few feet away, examining something on the ground. A beetle, it turned out, moving with great purpose across the sidewalk. "Words aren't the only way to talk," he said. His voice was even the same way he did everything. "Sometimes the heart says it first. The voice follows when it's ready." Claire looked at him. She had expected she didn't know what she had expected. Sympathy, maybe. Or the particular discomfort people showed when she revealed something they didn't know how to hold. She had not expected that. She didn't respond. She looked back at Lily, who had now extended one small finger toward the beetle, not touching it, just offering the presence of her hand. The beetle changed course. Claire walked back to the car, but something had shifted in the way she was carrying the question. It had moved from her head to somewhere lower, somewhere that strategies and resources couldn't quite reach. She had spent 2 years asking what was wrong with Lily and what could fix it. She had never once asked what Lily was already saying. Summer gave way to fall, and fall turned cold. The Tuesday mornings continued. The offerings continued a pine cone, a strip of washi tape Lily had carefully peeled from her art supplies. At home, a button she'd found in the lining of an old coat. Jack accepted each one, and Lily left each week with the particular satisfaction of someone who has completed something real. But she did not speak. October came with the first hard frost, and with it other things. Claire's mother called on a Sunday evening, her voice carrying the specific edge it reserved for conversations she'd prepared in advance. She had seen something in a column, one of those breathless little items that the city's gossip pages ran when they didn't have anything better to fill the space. A photograph, grainy, and shot from across the street of a small girl in a dark coat, standing beside a garbage truck. The caption was the kind of thing that had been written for maximum sting with minimum accountability. Claire. Her mother's voice was measured in the way that meant furious. "You need to end this." There were other voices, too. Her chief of operations mentioned carefully that a few board members had made remarks. Her publicist sent a carefully worded email using phrases like optics and perception management. The people around Claire were too professional to say it plainly, so they said it sideways. This looks like weakness. This looks like something has gone wrong. And Claire, who had spent her entire adult life refusing to let the perception of weakness become the reality of it, felt the old instinct rise in her clean automatic, decisive. Handle it. Remove the variable. Regain control. She made some calls. She found a specialist in Geneva, a man with a long name and a longer list of credentials, who worked with children in exactly Lily's situation. His facility was quiet, discreet, and extremely expensive. She told herself it was the right thing, the responsible thing. That she was not running from something, she was running toward the best possible option. She would tell Jack the following Tuesday, gently and without explanation, because she didn't owe him one. She would thank him for his kindness, and she would close this chapter in the particular way she closed everything efficiently and without looking back. She had made harder decisions than this before breakfast. The Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, a sky the color of old concrete pressing down over the city. Claire brought Lily to the block, as she always did. She had the words arranged in her head, a short, courteous sentence or two, nothing that invited response. She would stand near enough to be polite and far enough to make the distance clear. But Lily was already moving. She walked toward Jack the way she always did, steady and sure, and Jack turned from the truck to meet her. He crouched down to her level, the knees of his work pants against the cold sidewalk, and waited for the week's offering. Lily had nothing in her hands. She stood in front of him empty-handed, and something about that, the absence of the ritual, the breaking of the pattern, made the air feel different. Claire stopped walking. Even the street seemed to go quiet in the specific way that places sometimes do when something is about to become the kind of moment a person carries for the rest of their life. Lily lifted both hands and placed them on Jack's arm. Not grabbing, not clinging, just resting them there, her small palms against the worn orange fabric of his vest, the way you might place your hands on something to make sure it's real. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then, in a voice so soft it barely disturbed the air between them, in a voice that had been waiting somewhere deep and patient, for exactly this, Lily spoke. "Thank you." 2 words, barely above a whisper, but they landed like something that had been falling for a very long time, finally reaching the ground. Jack's face did something complicated and quiet. His eyes filled, and he let them without turning away or trying to compose himself into something more dignified. He just stayed there, crouched on the sidewalk, and let the moment be exactly what it was. Behind him, Claire heard it. She felt her phone leave her hand before she'd made any decision to drop it. It hit the sidewalk, and she didn't look down. Her vision had gone slightly unclear in a way that had nothing to do with the cold and the carefully arranged words she'd brought to this morning, the polite exit, the closed chapter. The flight to Geneva were simply gone, dissolved, as if they had never been a real plan at all. She stood on the sidewalk in the frost and the gray light, and for the first time since all of this had begun, she did not try to decide what to do next. She just stood there, and she let herself feel it, all of it. The relief and the grief and the thing underneath both of them that she hadn't had a name for until right now. Watching her daughter's hands resting on a garbage man's arm on a cold Tuesday morning, the whole city moving around them like it had no idea what had just happened. It didn't know. But Claire did. The Geneva plan was over. Whatever came next, it would not be that. Lily turned around. It was such a small movement, just a child turning on the sidewalk to look for her mother. But Claire felt it like a change in pressure, the way the air shifts before a storm arrives. Lily's eyes found her across the few feet of cold concrete between them, and her expression was open and certain in the way that children's faces are when they have not yet learned to be careful about what they show. "Mommy," Lily's voice was still quiet, still new to being used again, but it was there, solid and real. "Jack is nice." 3 words. After 2 words, 3 more. As if the door once opened had decided to keep opening. Claire walked toward her daughter, and when she reached her, she crouched down the same way Jack had. Knees on the cold sidewalk coat, be damned, and she pulled Lily against her. She wrapped both arms around the small body and held on, and for the first time in a very long time, Lily did not go still or rigid or somewhere else inside herself. She held on back. Both arms, no hesitation, her face pressed warm against her mother's neck. Claire closed her eyes. She had cried before in her life, of course, but always in private, always contained, always, over things she could justify: exhaustion, frustration, the specific grief of losing her father when Lily was barely a year old. She cried now in the middle of a sidewalk, in front of a garbage truck, and a man she had never really allowed herself to know. And she did not try to stop it, or manage it, or make it look like something other than what it was. It was not just the words, though the words were extraordinary. It was the sentence itself. Jack is nice, not the therapist, not the specialist from London, not the one from Zurich whose hourly rate had made even Claire's assistant wince when he read the invoice. Jack, the man with the faded vest and the wildflower and the patience that cost him nothing and somehow meant everything. Lily had found safety somewhere, and it had not been anywhere that Claire had arranged or purchased or controlled. It had been here on a public sidewalk in 2 minutes of a Tuesday morning, over and over again for months, and Claire had stood 20 feet away, watching it happen, and still not fully understood what she was seeing. She understood it now. It landed the way hard truths always do not, as a single blow, but as a slow understanding that rearranges something structural inside you. She had loved Lily with every resource at her disposal. She had loved her with specialists and interventions, and the absolute refusal to accept that something could be beyond her reach. What she had not done, what she had not known how to do, was love her with stillness, with the simple, undivided, unscheduled fact of being there. Jack had not done anything miraculous. He had just stayed where he was. He had not moved away when Lily came close, and he had not pushed when she didn't. He had made space and then occupied it quietly, and he had done it again the following week, and the week after that, until Lily's nervous system had finally accepted what her mind must have known for months, that this was safe, that he would still be there. Claire held her daughter on the sidewalk and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical what she had been doing wrong. Jack told Emily about it that evening over dinner. He didn't make a big thing of it. He never made big things of things. But he told her in the straightforward way. He told her most things because she was 6. And he had decided early on that she deserved honesty, calibrated to her age. Not the watered-down, carefully managed version that adults sometimes offered children as a substitute. Emily listened with the focused attention she brought to everything she considered important. She was working through a bowl of pasta while he talked, and when he finished, she set her fork down with the deliberateness of someone about to say something serious. "Why did Lily pick you?" she asked, "out of everybody?" Jack thought about it. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. So he took his time with it, the way he took his time with most things. She just needed someone to stand still long enough for her to feel seen, he said. That's all it was. Emily considered this for a moment, then picked her fork back up. "I can do that," she said, as if he had described a skill she was ready to practice. Jack looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, her gap-toothed certainty, her dinosaur shirt, her complete absence of doubt, and something in his chest felt full in a way it did sometimes, unexpectedly when he wasn't bracing for it. "Yeah," he said. "You can." It was Emily's idea to go to the park that Saturday, Not in any orchestrated way, she simply asked her father at breakfast if the girl from the sidewalk ever went to the park near their neighborhood. Jack mentioned it to Claire the following Tuesday, with the same offhandedness with which Emily had raised it, and Claire said she thought that sounded fine. They arrived separately. The park was half bare by November, the trees stripped to their architectural lines, the light thin and clean. Lily was bundled in a red coat that made her easy to spot from across the grass, and she saw Emily before Emily saw her, watching the older girl approach with that familiar stillness assessing. Emily walked up and stopped a few feet away. She didn't say hello. First, didn't ask Lily's name, didn't announce herself. She just reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, holding it out on her open palm. A marble. Glass, deep blue, the kind that catches light and holds it. "This is the best one I have," Emily said, with the gravity of someone offering a genuine treasure. "I only give them to people I actually like." Lily looked at the marble sitting in Emily's palm. She lifted it carefully between two fingers and held it up toward the pale November sky, the way she had held the daisy months ago, turning it slowly, watching the light move through it, giving it the full consideration it apparently deserved. Then she looked at Emily and said carefully, as if testing the weight of the words, "It looks like water." Emily's face opened into a grin. "I know. That's why it's the best one." And that was that. Lily slipped the marble into her own pocket, and Emily pulled out 2 sticks she'd found at the edge of the path and handed one to Lily, and within minutes they were both crouched over something in the dirt, with the total absorption that children bring to projects that have no particular goal. Claire stood at a distance on the path watching. She was not holding her phone. She had left it in her bag before they'd even gotten out of the car deliberately, in the way that you make a small promise to yourself and then decide to keep it. The cold air moved through the bare branches above her, and the sound of her daughter's voice, still quiet, still finding its range but present, animated real, carried across the grass to where she stood. She had built a company on the belief that outcomes were the product of decisions, that if you made the right calls with the right resources, in the right sequence, the results would follow. It was a belief that had served her extraordinarily well in every domain of her life, except the most important one. What Jack had known without theorizing about it, without being able to articulate it in any particularly sophisticated way, was something simpler and more fundamental than strategy, that some things could not be moved by force, that some things only moved when you stopped trying to move them. She had spent 2 years trying to move her daughter. She had not once tried simply standing next to her. She was going to do better. Not in the sweeping declared way that people announce transformations. She was too honest for that. She knew herself well enough to know that she would still be checking her phone at 7 in the morning, still be the last one off the call, still be the version of herself that her company needed her to be. She was not about to become someone else, but she was going to come home earlier. She was going to sit on the porch swing with Lily in the late afternoons when the light went gold and the city softened at its edges. She was going to be in the room, actually. In the room in the way that she hadn't been present, not just in body, while her mind ran inventory on everything waiting for her attention, but actually there in the particular way that Lily needed and that Claire had not understood until now. Was even a thing she could choose to give. It would not be perfect. She knew that too. There would be evenings when the crisis on the other side of the world was real and urgent, and Lily would go to bed before Claire could get off the call, and she would lie awake afterward, feeling it. There would be setbacks. There would be the ordinary grinding difficulty of changing a pattern that had calcified over years. But she was going to try. And Lily, who noticed everything, who had always noticed everything, who had simply been waiting for something worth responding to, would see that. Children always saw the effort even when it fell short, especially then. Winter passed, and then it was spring again. Lily's voice came back the way color comes back after a long gray season gradually, and then all at once, and then you couldn't remember quite what it had been like without it. She started with words, then short sentences, then the particular kind of running commentary that small children produce when they have decided the world is worth narrating. She talked about the beetle. She talked about the marble which she kept on her windowsill, where the morning light hit it. She talked once, at length, about the truck and what she thought it would look like inside, and whether Jack had a radio and what he listened to. Claire sat on the edge of her bed that night and answered every question, including the ones she didn't know the answer to, and she did not once look at her phone. The two families did not become friends in the dramatic, cinematic sense of the word. There was no grand dinner, no formal introduction, no declaration. It was quieter than that. It was Emily and Lily at the park on occasional Saturdays. It was Jack and Claire exchanging a few words on Tuesday mornings about nothing much about the weather and the neighborhood, and once about a book Lily had apparently been insisting everyone read. It was two people from entirely different corners of the world discovering that they could occupy the same sidewalk without it needing to be anything more complicated than that. Whatever chasm of background and money and circumstance had existed between them, and it was real, and neither of them pretended otherwise, it turned out to be narrower than what had already happened. Some things once they occurred simply outweighed the distances between people. On a Tuesday morning in early May, with the trees coming back into themselves and the city smelling like rain and possibility, Jack turned his truck onto the familiar block. He went a little slower here. He had, without ever making a conscious decision about it, simply started taking this stretch of the route at a different speed than the rest. Nobody had told him to. The schedule didn't require it. It was just a thing he did now, the way he did a lot of things quietly because it seemed right. He heard her before he saw her. "Hi, Jack." Lily was standing on the sidewalk in a yellow jacket, one hand raised in a wave that committed her whole arm to the gesture. She had apparently been waiting. Claire stood a few steps behind her, one hand wrapped around a takeaway coffee cup, watching with the particular expression she had been wearing lately, open a little soft around the edges. Still herself, but with something added to it that hadn't been there before. Jack leaned out the window and waved back. Big and full, the first wave, the kind that said, "I see you. I came back. I'm glad." Then he lifted his hand a second time, slower, lower, just for her. The wave that was different from the others, the one she would know, was only hers. Lily's arm went back up, matching him, and she was grinning that full, unhidden grin that had come back, along with everything else. The grin that her face had apparently been saving up. He drove on. He had a route to finish, bins to collect, blocks to move through, the whole ordinary machinery of the morning to complete. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. On the surface, a man in a faded orange vest, doing a job he'd been doing for nearly 2 decades, on a street like 1,000 other streets, in a city that was already accelerating into its day without him. But in the cup holder of the truck sat a smooth gray riverstone. On the visor, a pressed red maple leaf. On the dashboard, a paper crane with one wing slightly higher than the other, catching the early light. He drove a little slower. The morning held. Some people moved through the world loudly, leaving evidence of themselves in everything they built and everything they won. And some people, the quiet ones, the ones you might not notice unless you happen to stop and look left, evidence of a different kind. In the small things they did carefully, in the way they made space and held it open, in the fact that they kept showing up week after week without expectation and without condition until the people around them finally felt safe enough to show up too. Jack Harlan had not solved anything. He had not fixed anyone. He had simply been exactly who he was in exactly the place he was supposed to be doing what he always did, standing still long enough for the world to find him. And it turned out that was enough. Some days, the good ones, the ones that stayed with you, it was more than enough.